Stanford University.
Hello, my name's Boaler and I'm a Professor of Mathematics Education at Stanford University and the founder of UCubed, a new non-profit site that gives help to parents and teachers in mathematics learning, and I'll show you more of that at the end of the video. So there's a lot of confusion around about what's helpful in maths classrooms and whether the Common Core is going to help or hinder students' maths learning. Today, I'd like to share some of what we know from research that's come from careful studies of mathematics classrooms to help shed light on all of this. So in the US, math education has been built around a model that we know to be pretty faulty. Currently, almost 2/3 of students in the US are failing math, and that comes from before the days of Common Core. Some data that shows this clearly comes from two-year colleges. About 50% of students are in two-year colleges currently. 60% of them are placed into remedial math classes when they get there, basically repeating the math they took in high school. And even worse, only 25% of them pass. The rest fail or drop out and end up with no college degree. So math is the end of the road for them. We know that this is not because the students are lacking in any way. There is no such thing as a math gene or a math gift. It's not that they can't learn math. It's because of faulty mathematics teaching in the United States. So today I'm going to highlight 4 aspects of math instruction that need to change and show how the Common Core can help with those changes. First of all, we need to change math classrooms so that they offer math as a learning subject, not a performance subject. So what do I mean by that? Maths is the most over-tested, over-graded subject in the curriculum. If you ask most students what they think their role is in maths classrooms, they'll tell you it's to answer questions correctly. They don't even think that they're in maths classrooms to learn or to explore the rich set of connections that make up mathematics. They think they're there to get questions right. And this was really brought home to me recently when a colleague of mine told me that her 6-year-old son had come home saying he didn't like math. And when she asked him why, he said, math is too much answer time and not enough learning time. And it's interesting to me that even a 6-year-old was picking up that perception that maths is more about performing than it is about learning. So for students to see maths as a subject of learning instead of just a performance subject, we need tasks and questions in maths classrooms that have the space inside them to learn something. When students are spending all of their time in math class answering small questions that are right or wrong, it's very difficult to develop a learning orientation towards math. Students who approach math with a growth mindset, who believe that they can learn at any level, do much better in math. And at the end, I'll show you where you can learn more about mindset. Unfortunately, we knock students' self-belief out of them. And part of the way we do that is by giving them incorrect messages about math. And part of the way is by giving them constant questions that they think they're being evaluated all the time. So I want to show you what I mean by presenting maths questions with a space inside them to learn. When teachers ask students to find an area of a rectangle with sides of 12 and 4, which is a typical question, students are being asked to perform a single calculation correctly. There's one answer, there's usually one way of doing it. When teachers change the question slightly and ask students instead to find a rectangle with an area of 48, students are being asked to use their imagination and thinking. They need to consider different rectangles and to think about the relationships between length and width. They can propose different rectangles to each other and discuss the equivalence of area in the different rectangles. So in the first example, students were answering a question on area. In the second, they're learning about rectangles, about dimensions and area. So if a maths question doesn't have the space inside it to think and learn and discuss, then its potential as a learning task is very limited. Here's a second example. It comes from a math task designed by Ruth Parker. So I'd like you to really think about this question of how you see the shapes growing. You'll see that there are extra squares in each case. Where are they coming into the case? So I'm not asking you to think about numbers or to think about an algebraic expression, but visually, where do you see the extra squares coming when we move from one case to the next? So when we give students a task like this and they have to think about the growth of the function, they dive in and they're excited to show their different ways of thinking. It prompts levels of engagement that we rarely see in maths classrooms. Here are some different ways students can visually see the shapes growing, and you may have used one of these. My Stanford undergraduates and teachers I work with have started to give the different ways names. So many people see the shape growing by squares coming down on top, and my students have called this the raindrop method. Each time new squares come down like raindrops. Other people see it as what they call the bowling alley. It's like a row of pins coming in at the bottom, and each case has an extra row. Another way many people see it is what somebody's called the volcano method. So they sort of look at that central column and see that it goes up and kind of encourages the other squares out. And we can see the volcano method there. And then a fourth way that's really interesting is what I would call the square method. If you look at the first case, it's the best way to see this. If you move that red square and put it into the corner, you'll see you have a 2x2 square there. So some people see the shapes growing as growing squares. Now, I could have asked this question in a different way. Instead of asking you how you visually see it growing and where it grows to, I could have asked you the typical question, how many squares are in the 100th case? But when we ask the task in that way, this is what happens. People count the squares, they make a table often, they see that in the first case there's 4, in the second there's 9, in the third there's 16, and after some time, they'll eventually see that the function is growing as n plus 1 squared. And they'll say, I've got an answer, it's n plus 1 squared. Now, there's not a lot of space there to think differently. It doesn't recognize different ways of seeing it. And actually, the function we see there, n plus 1 squared, is a quadratic function. And so this goes to pretty high levels. But when I ask students who aren't asked to see it visually, but just stare like this, and I ask them, why is it squared? Why do you think that's squared? They'll usually don't know why it's squared. They don't even know what n is. So this is why it's squared. The function grows as a square, as we saw. So when we open tasks and ask students to think about how they see them and to talk with each other, the opportunities for learning are increased. When I give this task and ask students to consider it visually as they think about the expression, many more of them can come to understand what n is, they understand how this quadratic function grows, and they learn algebra with meaning. So this type of task is what I call a low floor, high ceiling task. It has a low floor, anyone can approach it and see how the squares are growing. But it has a very high ceiling. Students can take it to higher and higher levels and, investigate the quadratic function. They can also extend the task. Tasks such as these are perfect for extending and taking to new realms. If further challenge is needed, open, rich maths tasks can be adapted by students themselves and pursued to even higher levels. So I recently taught a class of low-achieving summer school students. They'd been made to come to summer school by their schools. They were 7th and 8th graders and they didn't want to be there. On the first day they had their heads on the desk, they looked really fed up, they had hoods up. And my graduate students and I taught them algebra through rich and open tasks such as the ones I've shown you. By the 3rd week, the same students were jostling to get into the room. They were excited to learn and to discuss the mathematics. We gave them these sort of open tasks. And by the end of 5 weeks, they achieved at significantly higher levels on formal tests of algebra. We need tasks that encourage learning in maths classrooms and to move away from math as a performance subject with lots of short questions. When students are taught with rich, engaging math tasks, instead of just following a teacher's methods, engagement and achievement increases. So the Common Core addresses this by encouraging longer tasks that have space inside them to learn and through which students can learn the standard methods they need, but with the depth they need to. So my second point is that classrooms should teach multidimensional mathematics. The world is changing. We no longer need students to just be fast calculators like we used to, and in fact computers do all that for us. We need students who can think and develop mathematical models and reason and problem solve. Leaders from Silicon Valley and the high-tech industries in general are really being outspoken now about the need for maths to change in schools. And a great example, if you want to look more at this, is a TED talk given by Conrad Wolfram of Wolfram Alpha, the big mathematics company, about the need for math change in schools. Sebastian Thrun is the inventor of self-driving cars, and he was a Google VP, he's the CEO of Udacity, and he also talks about the need for math change, and what they're calling for is what I call multidimensional mathematics. So one-dimensional mathematics is what you see in a lot of classrooms. The teachers explain methods, students repeat them. Some students are good at that, some students aren't, everybody usually knows. Some students can do it, but they just disengage because it's not very interesting. Multidimensional math is when teachers say, well, let's think about what mathematics is more broadly. A mathematician has to ask a question that is the first thing, a good mathematical question. They form models, they reason their way, they problem solve, they communicate in different ways, they connect ideas, and so on. These mathematical ways of working, the broader mathematics, is what's valued and taught in the high-performing countries in the world, but has been left out in the United States for a long time. So this is what Sebastian Thrun says about mathematics. He says, for many kids, math provokes an allergic reaction. Yet it's perhaps the single most important skill to have if you want to find a job in Silicon Valley. To me, math is all about problem solving, reasoning, using intuition and making connections. It's not about memorizing formulas. The world is mathematical, and I'm excited to see so much innovation in the teaching of math. I believe every student deserves to be a math hero, and I believe every student has the potential. So these mathematical ways of working now represented in the Common Core, in the practice standards, and the tasks that I've talked about, the rich open task, encourage these ways of working. My third point is all students should be encouraged to take math to the highest levels that they can. So we should be allowing all students to work and extend work. Tracking in schools is based on the idea that we can categorize students and teach them then in the same way and at the same pace. This is problematic, and studies of tracking show that, first of all, many students are misplaced, but also that it results in lower achievement overall. Students all have different needs at different times, and they need different learning opportunities. But it's faulty to think that we can just accurately pre-decide what students are capable of and then teach them all in the same way. Most of the student grouping that's used in schools in the US is very crude, and it limits students. It limits their achievement, those at the low and the high achievement ends. What we should do instead is provide students with rich mathematics tasks that they can extend in different directions and take to different levels. When we do this in classrooms, the high achievers just take off and hit the roof because they can take them anywhere, and the low achieving students start working at higher levels. Having kids mixed together in groups doesn't bring down the high-achieving students. It works in the opposite way and brings up the bottom. So the task we looked at, the quadratic function task, is an example of a task that everybody can start thinking about the shapes, but that some students can take to very high levels. There's a lot of research evidence showing the negative impact of tracking for students of all levels. Experimental studies where they've followed students in tracked and untracked groups show higher achievement for students in the untracked groups when they're taught well at all levels. And countries that top the world in achievement, countries as different as China and Finland, don't use the very crude methods of tracking as a way of providing different learning opportunities for students. So in response to the research evidence we have on tracking and also the opportunity to plan students' math courses through the new Common Core, some school districts are taking away advanced classes in the early years and the corresponding low classes that some students end up in forever, and teaching differently to enable all students to work at high levels for the longest possible time. In San Francisco, for example, the school board recently voted unanimously to remove any advanced classes until 10th grade after they studied the research evidence, to give students the best opportunity to excel before then. This has caused some anxiety in that and other districts that are doing similar things, with parents of the high-achieving students in particular worrying that they will no longer be able to excel. This anxiety is misplaced, and if we look at San Francisco's course placement map as an example, we can see that students can excel and go on to calculus, including BC calculus, just as they could before. Some districts have also changed from the traditional course sequence of algebra then geometry, which is only used in the US, teaching instead what's called integrated mathematics, which the rest of the world teaches. Integrated maths provides the opportunity for algebra and geometry to be combined, which means the most interesting tasks can be used that aren't made artificial or narrow so that they fit into separate content areas. So a placement from one of the districts in San Diego, Vista Unified, shows the way students can progress through the integrated sequence and still reach BC calculus. A misconception that's widespread in the US is the idea that students will ultimately do better if they meet mathematics content earlier and faster. This is incorrect, and we have plenty of data that shows that students who are advanced in maths content often lose the critical ability to think and reason as they're just pushed through content at a fast pace, and many of them ultimately end up choosing out of mathematics. One data set that really shows this clearly came from over 7,000 students, and some of the students were taught heterogeneously and using more multi-dimensional mathematics. The other students were taught in tracks and they had advanced classes and they came from more affluent homes. And what we see is at the start of 6th grade, the groups from the more affluent homes were slightly higher in achievement, but by 8th grade, the students who were in advanced classes were scoring significantly lower levels. They were lower with only 20% of them doing well on Mars tasks or reaching proficiency, which assess conceptual understanding, and only 35% on the CST tests, which are the standard state tests. Whereas the students who were in the heterogeneous classes, learning more conceptually, had higher pass rates both on the CSTs and on the Mars assessments. So my final point is this: mathematics classrooms should encourage more depth and less speed. Many people believe that good math students are fast math students, but that's incorrect. I work with many mathematicians, and we could think of mathematicians as the highest mathematical thinkers, but they're not fast thinkers. They think slowly and deeply about math. This is Lawrence Schwartz. He won the Fields Medal in Maths, which is the highest prize you can get in maths. It's like winning an Oscar in maths. And when he was in school, he thought of himself as stupid because he was one of the slowest thinkers in the class. And this is a reflection from his autobiography about his school days. He said, "I was always deeply uncertain about my own intellectual capacity. I thought I was unintelligent, and it's true that I was, and still am, rather slow. I need time to seize things because I always need to understand them fully. Towards the end of 11th grade, I secretly thought of myself as stupid, and I worried about this for a long time. I'm still just as slow. At the end of 11th grade, I took the measure of the situation and came to the conclusion that rapidity doesn't have a precise relation to intelligence. What is important is to deeply understand things and their relations to each other. This is where intelligence lies. The fact of being quick or slow isn't really relevant." We urgently need to dissociate mathematics from speed, and so that we can stop the slow, deep thinkers who could go very far, like Lawrence Schwartz, believe that they can't do math. And as he said, it's not speed that's important, it's deeply understanding things and their relations to each other. And I have an article in The Atlantic that talks about a lot of this. If you Google my name and The Atlantic, it will come up. You can read more. Time tests have been shown to be the early onset of math anxiety for many students, and I'll show you in a minute where you can read more about that. So in conclusion, the Common Core provides important directions for the United States. Teachers will need support and training to change their teaching for sure, but I have every faith and a lot of evidence that teachers can make these changes. Last summer I taught an online course, a MOOC as they're called, that taught teachers and parents key ideas about math learning and how to make the changes that are needed. It was amazing, actually. 40,000 people registered, and 92% at the end said they were very or extremely satisfied. 95% of people said they would change their teaching or ways of helping children at home as a result, and 8 times as many finished that as most MOOCs. And that was from 8 online sessions. Those are available again at Stanford Online if you'd like to take that. If you're interested in reading more about the ideas I've shared in this video or seeing some classrooms where these ideas are in place in the US and in Shanghai, the place that tops the world in math achievement currently, then please visit UCubed. This is a non-profit site that I've formed to give wide access to high quality resources to teachers and parents. And if you sign up there, you'll get newsletters, and we don't pass on emails. You'll also see there a new free online course for students of math that I've designed to help give every student a positive path with math learning. So you can find all of that at UCubed, and I hope to see you there.